I said to her, why are you even you can't even breathe.
Don't talk.
She went yesterday and then, because my older sister's smart anyway, but she did go because I said, Barb, I think it wouldn't hurt you to get an x-ray.
Oh.
Because you think? I said, Barb, that's how and I told
There's
her.
flu and bronchitis going
Yes,
around too.
and that's
so.
how I was at Easter this year.
Uh-huh.
Like, I had a cocktail of 3 different viruses because they did blood work at the hospital and kept me there for a few days. I mean, I don't know that I actually felt well to be really honest. Stay away. But let me ask you.
I'm going to be wearing a mask again. And,
Okay.
you know, in the past, when it has, been getting out of hand, they have asked us not to come to serve, just to drop
Okay.
off your food.
I
and go.
understand.
So I'll see what the lay of the land is.
So there's only one other, is there anyone else from, I'm sorry, Pastor.
That's okay.
Is there anyone else from
No.
church? Because I could
Winnie Lane.
easily get a lane. How inconvenient would it be if I brought our stuff here for you then, Debbie?
It would not be inconvenient at all. I could pick it up and then just
Because
go
I would
back.
come here with ours.
That
Would that be
fine.
all right?
Yeah, because I was
'Cause
going
I'll
to
get
say,
your name.
when I get there, I like to get there a little before 5.
Okay.
So maybe if you had.
4:30? You want me to come?
4:30, the latest. Like
Okay,
maybe
I can make it earlier.
Yeah, 4:15.
I'm
Is that
great with
possible?
that.
Okay.
No, that's wonderful. And I'll call Elaine because I could talk with her. Sorry.
It's okay. Good
Okay.
morning, everyone. Good
Good
morning to the
morning.
live stream. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, Barbara.
Barbara, in your view, just to your left is Debbie, but she said she didn't want to see you.
You don't need to see me. You know what I
Troublemaker.
That's not what I see.
So welcome to for the live stream and for the Zoom. We are here at the High Mountain Presbyterian Church, and we are joining together in conversation as we read the scriptures. We are reading in Isaiah and discussing this time in the history of Israel when the people have, in some ways, they have rebuilt their way of life and their culture has come back, and now we're listening to the words of both a contemporary Isaiah, and then in this same book is a much later Isaiah, and then even a much later Isaiah. So if that confuses you and you're watching for the first time.
Isaiah, please stand up.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And the time period is very different, and in some ways it looks almost miraculous because there are things that we consider to be fortune-telling that actually aren't really seeing into the future. It's sort of describing the present time and then backdating it. So I'm sorry for those of you who don't read the Bible that way, but that's how we read it when we read it with the advice of scholars who try to help us to see what is the period of time when each piece is written. And you can tell by dialects and things that are talked about that don't exist unless we give it a different time and date. Okay, so who remembers where we were when we last read?
Do you think we're
It's
10? That's what I was going to
Okay,
say, Barbara.
that's good. Yeah, I see my notes here,
Okay.
up to 10. So Isaiah has, prior to chapter 10, Isaiah has just finished a long oracle. An oracle that begins with the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Of course, that's a very familiar phrase from Scripture that gets used in a lot of settings because there are certainly periods in all of our lives where, darkness, I don't know if it's good or bad, but as a metaphor, darkness represents difficulty in life. And so there are periods of darkness. One of the preachers I follow, Barbara Brown Taylor, has written a book called Learning to Walk in the Darkness. And so there's something to be said for living into the experiences of pain and difficulty and suffering, but there almost always is associated with that the longing for a time when that's going to go away. So like the night gives way to the dawn, we look for those experiences in life where the light comes, where the light shines. And Isaiah is loved because Isaiah promises that even to the most difficult periods of time. And he does venture a little bit into trying to interpret why the darkness came. And I always feel like you need to be really careful looking for cause and effect. There is brokenness and chaos in the world. I believe in the God who created the universe and sustains it, but I also believe there is a huge element of life and creation that is chaos still. I mean, is that the way you think about it? Is that
Sure.
part of your own? I don't know if it's true, and I should check it, but in Jewish theology, I think it was the rabbi who wrote, "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?" He says that in Jewish theology, the scriptures talk about 6 days of creation. And in the 6 days of creation, chaos is giving way to order. The land and the water are getting separated. And then it says, on the 6th day, at the end of the 6th day, on the 7th day, God rested. But it never says that God was done. And that the reason that becomes important is that we still live in a world that is unfinished in terms of God's creation. And that's part of, in Jewish theology, in some strains of Jewish theology, is why we experience the brokenness and the chaos still. And that we are living in the 8th day. This is called 8th day theology. And there's a lot of Christians that have crossed over and used that as well. There's even actually a very popular Christian rock band called 8th Day. So it's a way of thinking about it. It's what I call extra biblical, because the Bible actually does not refer to the 8th day of creation. And it also doesn't say that God rested when God was done.
In Islamic theology, there's no rest. God never rests. God
Not even on the 7th day?
Not any day. No,
Really?
really.
So how do they,
God doesn't need rest. We do. God doesn't. That's Islamic thinking.
well, I understand that. I think that makes sense. But I think that the Sabbath, and the reason the emphasis on God resting was always, who do you think you are? If God rests, then how dare you not? You know, that's a defiance of your,
We dare not rest either if we don't need it. When you recognize that,
Bless you.
God bless you. There's no official day of rest in Islam. There's a day, Jummah, when everyone goes collectively to the mosque. But as
Which
far
day of
as-
the week is that,
As a
Debbie?
Friday,
Okay.
which is called Jummah, Friday.
but you just go to the mosque
But
and
there's no.
then you return to work and,
Yeah, well, first of all, in the United States you do, because it's not a weekend. We don't have a weekend day. But there's no admonition to take a day where you don't do any work, or, it's, if you need a rest, and everyone does, then you decide for yourself. But there's no day specifically where everyone should, take a knee and stop. And, but here in New Jersey, there's still blue laws in Bergen County.
yeah.
And I think that's a very Dutch thing.
Mhm.
And, you're not, there's a lot of statutes about what you are and not allowed to do on the Sabbath.
Like you can't wash your house
Sunday.
windows,
There's a
couldn't
lot of
sweep
those
your
things.
side. This was,
You can't work on your car and your
this was like
driveway. That was
Hawthorne,
Midland
Prospect
Park.
Park, Haledon, North
I don't know if
Haledon.
they
As I grew
recalled-
up,
Right.
they had,
You could get a ticket.
yeah, they did, they had,
There's no such thing in Islam as far as I know. I'm not a scholar. If I'm wrong, forgive me, but
It's fascinating to me, though. I never knew this because, in trying to explain what Christianity and Judaism are as a united religion, the one thing,
that they had in common.
the one thing, and the thing that is emphasized throughout the scripture is observing the Sabbath rest, because to me, the understanding of it is, the principle is, as I said, we all need to be reminded that we are not God. We are not God. And the regular limp that we're supposed to carry around that reminds us that we are not God is that 7 days are given in creation, but 1 out of the 7 we rest because God rested. And you know, the arguments about Sabbath in Jesus' time even, you know, they were big, but Jesus' exceptions were the Sabbath could be violated for saving human life.
Yeah, doing good.
And
Things that are necessary. In Islam, in the Islamic countries, predominantly Islamic, Jummah is the day off. It's like the weekend. So, you know, collectively, everybody says we need to get to the mosque that day. Men are required to go to the mosque. It's something like Catholicism. You should go to
You have to
church.
go, yeah.
So, that day is the day they have off from work. I mean, there's days, but there's no, you're not committing a sin if then you go open your shop later.
right, you go work on that day.
Or if you choose to do, you know, to do work in your home or whatever, but there's no law like there was for Christians and Jews.
I have a friend who's Jewish, and on Friday night, her husband and his brothers go to synagogue. And then Saturday morning, they always went, when she had her children and all, they always went as a family. Now it's just her and him who go. And that's how they observed the Sabbath.
Yeah, after
I think
sundown
that's
on Friday night,
right.
you go to the synagogue.
Yeah, and it would always change. I love that she explained all that to me, that the time of the synagogue, the worship hour is changed by the sundown.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not set. Like
Well,
I
the
said-
day begins in the evening.
Yeah,
And
and
then-
I said, wow, Rebecca, that is just,
Yeah,
Yeah.
every day we think of the day as beginning at sunrise, but in the
Islam,
Jewish
it's
Jewish
sundown,
calendar,
right.
it's the day is ended.
Yeah.
So once the day is ended, then the new day has begun, and it begins in the dark. But also when I lived in Bergen, the other side of Bergen County, Jewish communities everywhere on Saturday, the major experience that you had was
Everybody walks.
people walking.
Yeah.
Everybody
And
walking.
they have a
And
room if you want to push your.
right.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, especially the conservative and.
Yeah, and-
Yeah.
Orthodox communities.
Just that whole commitment to Sabbath. And I feel like I need to say, just to remind myself of this, is that the Sabbath, well, according to Walter Brueggemann, who I accept as the expert on reading the Old Testament, Jewish or Christian, he says that the Sabbath in the practice of the people finds its way back to the argument with Pharaoh. That the argument Moses had, so the pinnacle confrontation in the biblical story of the representative of God, Moses, and his brother Aaron, face to face with the representation of everything that is broken and chaotic, which was Pharaoh, that argument that took place with them was that Moses argued that Pharaoh needed to give the people a day off. And that he was arguing that this people, the Hebrew people, if they did not have that day of rest, would no longer be Hebrews. They would no longer
They're
exist.
violating the Hebraic law,
Right. You are forcing them
Mosaic.
to lose complete contact with their identity as a people, and you cannot do that. So Moses' argument was, give them one day, and they will go out into the wilderness, out of the confines of Egypt, and they will do the religious rituals related to their own identity of faith. And Pharaoh says, you're not tricking me. I know what you're doing. You're going to get out beyond the range of my arrows and the spears, and you're going to take off. And Moses says, that is absolutely not what we're going to do. We are looking to reconnect with our identity. And so from that conversation, my sermons of many Christian pastors have been that one of the greatest threats to our identity, we were talking last night a little bit about, what does it really mean to have, quote, a relationship with God, but that the core of it is this idea that I am not God, let God be God. And how do I show that is I take a day and I lay down my tools of work and I rest. Now, everybody didn't do that voluntarily, so it became a law. And we said, you were talking about smatterings of it even still today.
And it got extreme, and I think it's kind of crazy. It's a way to build, not to recognize your faith, but to get revenue for the town. You're gonna
Right.
get a ticket.
Yeah, I mean, the way it functions here is
It's kind of
very
questionable.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then also another element that Brueggemann brings in is that in the slave community in early America, in that 400 years of slavery, many of those human beings found help and strength in the images and the words of the Bible. And so they weren't quite organizing like the Immokalee workers were, but one of the things that happened in a very alarming way was that the slaves would choose a day, and they would communicate in their own way where they would do a work stoppage. And it was called, I love this, Brueggemann loves it, it was called a hoedown,
Oh,
which is where and a hoedown was a party.
yeah.
It was a party
your partner.
in place of work and a refusal to work. Now, the refusal was not part of what was carried so much because that was sort of hush-hush, but the slaves would say, I'm laying my hoe down today. I will not work today. And, you know, again, there's a lot that went on in that period of time we know about and a lot we don't know about. But Brueggemann, in the history of the African Americans in the United States, emphasizes that where did they get the idea and the strength for doing that? They got it from this connective narrative from the story of creation, the argument between Pharaoh and Moses, and ultimately what happened was Moses said, okay, we're going to the wilderness to do this. We're going to do this no matter what you say. And then you have the plagues and all the rest of that that come.
Lied to Pharaoh.
Well,
He said he wouldn't go to the wilderness.
he said he
and
wouldn't.
keep
He
going.
said he wouldn't run away. But
Pharaoh.
but in the progression of their negotiations,
Right.
Moses says, "No, I know, but I think about it too. It's like, really? So you didn't come back? They wanted to. Some of them after they got out, but Moses finally says, if you do not do this willingly, then you will have to release this people, and you will because you cannot do this to them." So what they say is, after all the plagues and Egyptians died by the thousands in the telling of the story, and then Egyptian boys, and Pharaoh recants. But in the recanting, Moses makes it clear, now you've done it. Because now we're leaving, and we're going to take the spoils of Egypt with us. So they raid the treasury. They take everything Pharaoh has, including his son, because at this point, he's described as laying down in grief, and he doesn't care. Like, whatever. Take whatever you want. Go. I don't ever want to see you again, until they get outside the city gates.
And then he has different thoughts.
Yeah, then he changes his mind again.
It's funny too, in Islam, when Pharaoh chases the whole bunch of Beni Israel into the wilderness, they're coming to the sea and it parts, and about 2 minutes or a minute or seconds before the water comes crashing back down onto Pharaoh, he says he believes in God. He changes his mind, he believes in God. And the story in Islam is it's too late then. When you actually see that you're going to, I mean, the moment of death is upon you, it's too late. It's not too late up to that point, but the moment of death, too late.
Deathbed confessions, huh?
So I don't know how you calculate that, but it was too late for Pharaoh. That's what we're told.
All right.
So he's really the big villain in Islam too. And anytime a world leader is acting really horribly, he's compared to the Pharaoh in Islam. I mean, everybody's
Right.
sermon, everybody's khutbah on Friday, on Jumu'ah will be Putin. He's Pharaoh.
Right.
He's going to
Sure.
be like Pharaoh.
Well,
He's still the big.
oh, and that's very true still in African American preaching. The AME church, the pharaohs of today, and many of them stir up that image too of the hoedown and the work that is required when Pharaoh says, okay, you want to be free, now you'll do bricks without straw. The requests for decent conditions and living conditions and working conditions often results in a hardening of the conditions, and that is traced directly to the tradition of Pharaoh. That was Pharaoh's way, which is, really, you want a day off? How about you work now an extra 5 hours every day, and you think you have it bad? Let me show you what bad is. And that is represented because Brueggemann is a very outspoken critic of corporate America and of the abuse of the worker in our culture. The abuse of the worker at the benefit, just the benefit. I didn't read the whole story, but I saw last night that there's a prince, a Saudi prince, that is in charge of an estimated estate valued at $619 billion. And at $619 billion, they're still raising the price of oil in the world, because it's not just even middle-class people who need gasoline and oil products. It's the little people. It's the little people of the world who will suffer while, how big is $619 billion for one person to control?
There's no way to even wrap your head around that
And
number.
he's not the richest dude in the
No.
world.
There
It's
you
Elon
go.
Musk, look at
Right.
him.
Oh, no.
Wealth kind of corrupts.
Yeah.
Power corrupts. It's true. Yeah.
Pastor Luke, going back to the time of slavery, I just finished reading a book that is, I should qualify it, it's historical fiction based on facts. It's called The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate. And she talks about, a lot of research was done for this. She talks about how the slaves had to go to church with their masters.
Oh, right.
This is before they started
Yep.
their own, that was very hidden, that they had their own time of worship. But those ME churches actually come from, the churches that the masters went to. And they even had different clothes that they could only wear when they went to that master's church, because they kind of wanted to see, my slaves look better than your slaves. There was always a competition on all levels.
Were they allowed into the sanctuary?
I
or-
doubt that.
In the Boundbrook Church, which was in existence at that time, the balcony was built in the
Yeah.
church for the slaves.
Probably.
And there was to be no noise from the balcony at all.
At
But they
all.
were present because, like you said,
Yeah.
the slave owners were trying to show their super spirituality by forcing their slaves to come. But the slaves would leave the 11 o'clock worship services, and when they went back to camp in the evening, they would have their own church service.
Yeah.
And there's a huge historical study about what happened when in the white church, the scriptures would be read, and the story of a God, this book is the story of a God who heard the cries of slaves, heard the cries of the slaves, and came and delivered them. That salvation was not spiritual, like it was in this story. This is the God of liberation, the God who hates slavery, the God who will enact miracles to set the pharaohs aside. And that's where the songs that were created, which we call African American spirituals, they're based on what the slaves heard, which the masters didn't realize that they were teaching them. And also in seminary, I took a course on folk religion, and that one of the things there were communities where the slaves were required to come, but there were also communities where the slaves were banned from attending and being in the building. And so the masters were at church.
And while they were
And while they were away, the slaves would gather outside the windows.
That's what I,
They would crouch down at the windows because they wanted to hear the story of this God who recognized the plight of human beings who were in slavery.
I can see the slaves who had to drive the masters
Uh-huh.
and escort the, the ladies' maids, like the house slaves.
Right.
Standing outside listening, and then coming back and gathering with the field slaves and singing songs that spoke of the stories and
Yeah,
preaching.
right.
and-
Telling the story of the God of the Bible. Isn't this amazing? The God of the Bible. And they're letting us read it, and they're telling us about it.
What is it, lay down Moses?
Yeah, let my people go, right?
That's what was the,
Yeah.
Hebrew spiritual system?
Yeah.
Lay
They're,
down Moses.
they're
Or
wonderful.
go down, Moses.
Go down, Moses, go down to
Yeah, way
Israel
down in
land,
Egypt land.
and tell Pharaoh to
Let my people go. I mean,
Right, Barbara.
how do you think that landed in the communities where slaves were beaten and their lives and livelihood were controlled by other people?
It was the controlling narrative. I
Yeah.
think. The big main story
Yep.
is, we shall be free someday, we will be
Yeah.
free. And not just when we die, but maybe here, maybe the Pharaoh will be defeated.
As I was reading this book, they had like some people singing as they went, saying, well, someone who's dressed in red, someone in white, and it like all rhymes, like it was very, you could almost imagine them singing this as they worked. And boy, as I did that, I kept thinking, boy, Reagan could really do justice to this. This, of course, I don't know the music or anything, but I was just thinking the whole time, like how she sings those spirituals.
Right.
And it was very moving, the words are very moving.
And so this Isaiah, one of the three, Isaiah arrives, and I guess what I want to say is my heartache about the tradition of Christianity that I grew up in was, in the same way that the African slaves contextualized the message to say this God is about our lives in our world, in what we are actually doing, and they didn't long for, the slaves were not longing for spiritual freedom. They were not. They were not longing for spiritual salvation.
They were told they should.
They were told that's what it's about, but there was a spiritualism about life after death, because for some of them, the only visible hope, I mean, slavery was in existence for 400 years, and then another 100 years after it was declared illegal. So,
Here in the United States.
yeah, here in the United
'Cause
States.
It's been around since.
Oh, and
Ever.
well, and it's still going on. We read earlier, that when Israel was conquering those nations, they made slaves out of the conquered people. I mean,
That's what everyone did.
Yeah.
If you're the conqueror, you got
The
the
spoils,
spoils,
that's
and that
right.
included people to do your work for you.
So Isaiah,
It's good to be the king.
I love Isaiah's words, because Isaiah is, I want to say that Isaiah is not spiritual. Isaiah is very contextual. Yes. Oh, Salma. Sorry.
We're talking about chaos.
Mhm.
And I think what I've heard from contemporary Jews that I know is one of the big themes in their synagogues is tikkun, I think it's olam, repair of the world.
Right.
So there is that idea that there still is
Yeah.
things to be fixed, things that you are responsible to fix here on earth.
Right. You shall be called the repairers of the breach.
Right.
Isaiah says that.
And I think that
So it's coming
still
up.
lives on.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say, is that there's a lot of pirating of the words of Isaiah, who talks about light dawning in the darkness and all of that. And in my tradition, it got spiritualized. It became not about and this is also where the idea of the devil really took on a new reality, because you didn't dare think of the chaos represented in a person in the world, but you could spiritualize the evil and the brokenness, what Pharaoh represented, and you'd be safe. So you didn't have to call out, the owner of the factory that, was in charge of the employment of 90% of the people in the town. If the people were suffering, they were suffering because of the devil. And so they spiritualized the struggle, right? The struggle is spiritualized. Pharaoh, if they talk about Pharaoh in the Christian tradition I grew up in, they didn't, because Pharaoh felt like that was too much this world. But the devil works to be able to spiritualize the chaos, and then that matches with a kind of, I don't know, I call it it's a mystification. It's a not skin and bones
Not tangible at all.
kind of salvation. So the salvation from the devil's goes about the world seeking whom he may devour, right? But you're never given permission to think, for example, that devil might be the abusive male person who is in charge of your home, who's beating your mother and taking all the money and going out and drinking. When that happens, you look at that person and you go, well, that's the devil doing that in him. But the spirituality of Isaiah doesn't really support that. This is this world.
Like an amalgam of both Judaism and Christianity in that respect, because there is a recognition that the Shaitan is at work in the world and whispering to you to do the things that are easy, or that you have a yen to do, but you shouldn't. That's the Shaitan. But you still have a responsibility to your community if somebody is under the influence of the Shaitan, to call them out as a human being doing a bad thing.
Right.
And you're really required as a community to do that, because you're going to be responsible as an individual, but the whole community too will answer if no one has tried to stop the horribleness around them. And you look around at the state of the world and you say, hey, we're all kind of falling short. 'Cause there's a lot of chaos still.
Yeah.
Yeah, Debbie, I always think of, when I was in catechism, we had this one nun, and she often said, the sins of omission are greatly overlooked.
Right. Right. Standing by.
Yes,
I
just,
think that's
and it was,
along that
and I
line.
think that's the kind of thing that's easy to convict yourself of. When you've rationalized it, no, I don't have to get involved. I mean, I know, and I'll speak for I know when I've rationalized out of doing what was right, or what I could have done, not only should have, but could have done.
Yeah.
So I liked your idea of the satanic figure whispering in your ear, because remember, that was also Pharaoh's problem. Pharaoh was not initiating this terrible commitment that led to so much death and structuring, because God was hardening Pharaoh's heart.
And that's
So,
another-
and so, again, it creates, if you like systematic theology, so what systematic theology says, that one part fits together with the other part. The problem is, God is whispering, you said in Islam, it's the satanic forces that are whispering in our ear. In the story, it's God who is whispering into the ears of Pharaoh and hardening Pharaoh's heart. And I always want to just go, okay, you need to put a box around that and just set that over there and never forget that, because you cannot easily work that into, I'll call a systematic theology of a God of grace and of love who wants to see the world move out of chaos. God seems to be planting the seeds of chaos. And that sometimes, what do they say? You have to break eggs to make cake.
Yep.
So maybe there's an element of God is.
But I still put it on Pharaoh.
Oh yeah, I do too.
Pharaoh's not open to God. Not connected with God in any way, and so then your heart hardens.
Right.
And you can't hear
Yes.
or see God at work in the world.
And I agree with that. And so that's what I do to soften that idea so that it continues to fit into my world where we are responsible for our own behavior.
Judas Iscariot is one of those I have trouble with, Pastor.
Yeah, I mean, and look, Broadway and the drama tried to deal with that by
Yeah.
pretending that Judas had in mind, turn Jesus in so that then the new kingdom would come. That's not what it says.
No, I know.
What it says is that Judas was a traitor.
But it makes it more palatable.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
It works better in our systematic need to see things all fitting together.
Exactly. I remember being in Holocaust, like what we're doing now, and asking people, well, the shaitan, he didn't bow down to God when God said, now all creation bow down.
Right.
And that was his big sin. He did not do what God asked of him.
Right.
So he was the fallen angel.
It's thrown out.
Right.
Right.
And so I felt sorry for him. Because I felt, well, if God is in charge, God caused that too. Why, and then I was, no. God didn't cause it. He, of his own volition, said, I'm not bowing down. You said, or it was, they were all supposed to bow down to Adam. That's what it was. And he said, I'm not bowing to anyone but God. And I felt like, you're right. But you can't say that.
No.
So, I remember, arguing that point with a few people. And so I just felt sorry for maybe the origin of chaos in the world, because that would have been it. And then, eventually Adam and Hawa were thrust out of paradise too, so they go down. And we're here in a world that is not paradise.
Right.
And we have to experience the world the way it is.
Well, and
But I still feel sorry.
no, and I think I agree with you that feeling sorry. So, I come at this in a way that makes it hard for me sometimes in the Christianity that exists in the world is dualistic. It's dualistic. It just is. And that dualism doesn't come from the Bible. And what I mean by dualism is that the world, as you see it when you get up in the morning, is a struggle of good and evil.
Gnosticism.
Right. And so, the evil, we have to fight against the evil because the evil has separate power. But that's why I always want to go back and go, let's look at the biblical account of the garden. There is no Satan in the garden. It's the Apostle Paul in the year 70 and 80 AD, who says that the serpent was Satan. It is not in the tradition of the Jewish people, because the Jewish people were not dualistic. They did not see even the dualism we see of the body, where the body is made up of the spirit and the body. They never looked at life that way. If its bad consequence was if you had a hand missing, you were missing part of yourself. It wasn't just, you're missing part of your body, but, your self remains whole. No. When you were missing your hand, you were missing a hand.
That's why when you die, they send the ambulance, the Orthodox, to come out and try to find, if you were in a car accident, say,
They want
every
all of you.
last
Right.
piece of skin or bone or, whatever they can find, because you need to be whole, buried.
Right.
Yep.
So in our modern day society, we sort of Middle Ages anchored the existence of the being in the heart, right? So, I love you with all my heart. Our understanding is different. We know that the heart doesn't have anything to do with our consciousness. So now we really should be sending Valentine's cards to each other to say, I love you with all of my brain. Or I love you with all of my medulla oblongata. Like, it's, and if you go back even further, beyond the heart, they actually believed it was in the stomach.
Oh, yeah.
The center of the human being was in the stomach.
was a big deal.
Right, but the reality is, for this time in which we're reading, the self was contained wholly in every part of the body. So it's hard to think of where do I stem from? Oh, it's the state of New Jersey calling me. Darn it. Oh, I'm just going to have to let them go. So if I am wholly in my body and I exist not just in my brain, but throughout my body, to me, that's a better basics of all of our ethics, because then we'll have a tendency to care more about the whole person. You know, the whole body, the whole person. So I like that. But I go back to the garden, and that's why, you know, keep repeating this. In the garden, there was two human beings. There was the created order. Now remember, it all began in chaos. And so there was something brought out of the chaos which was called order. The trees, the fish, the air, the sea, and land separated. There was that created order, and it had a life of its own. So there is even Adam, there's the created order, and there's God. And what results, I think, of course I think I'm right, but I think if you just try to clear your mind of everything you've been told about who's there and who's not there and what's going on, is that the theology about chaos and of the evils that take place arose from the interaction of human beings with the created order. And there's an element in the created order that is not finished. So when do we struggle the most? When are we struggle the most with the unordered part of the creation still. And it causes us, we use the word temptation, it tempts us.
Peace in the world, okay.
Right.
But, you know, when you're talking about that, could that unfinished business be us, as human beings, trying to reconnect directly with God? I mean, if you take the Genesis story, we were walking.
We were once with God, walking with God.
And then we were sent into this
Right.
world, and maybe, you know, that's part of the biggest strife is, you know, in Islam you're promised you will return to
Right.
Allah. So that's when things get really repaired.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Perhaps?
Yeah, and the Greek word sin, which we use too liberally, says that what you're describing is that in the union that once was between, not just between God and human beings, but God and creation, it was relationships, which God loves. God just loves relationships, and so there the relationships are intact. But there's something about, I'm going to call it life. There's something about life, about the created order, about the way things are in the world that cause human beings to distrust God. And that the scriptures, the Hebrew people describe as a relationship gap. That's sin. The space between God and what once was, the union of relationship, is sin. And what caused sin? Well, I always say, look, as a pastor, I look around and I say, what separates people from God? What creates the gap? Not just historically, but it's the way the earth exists. And you have the possibility for greed. You have the possibility in insecurity, for hoarding. You have the possibility of not telling the truth, which, you know, when you don't tell the truth, when you don't speak the truth, the New Testament is full of the warnings of this, you are widening the gap between yourself and other people, but you're also widening the gap between yourself and God. All of that. You can do all of that and never ever resort to the idea of an underworld like the Greeks had, where, you know, you have these. Yeah, you know, I mean, I get it. It works for comic books, but I just don't think of the world that way. I just don't. And I think Isaiah doesn't either. I mean, Isaiah is trying to push the people to a more this world kind of way of relating to God. And I'll use the word practical. He says, we'll read it later, how can you claim that you have relationships with the God of food and the harvest and all the things that provide an abundance for you, but you hoard them for yourselves and people starve to death? How can you do that? And
Even when I send you stuff, you still want something else.
that's right.
That story about manna in the desert.
Yeah,
That's
there you
right.
go.
You know, I fed you with, the sky was falling with bread of a sort,
Still want something.
and you wanted meat, and then you got meat,
Yeah.
and you still weren't satisfied. And so there
But
is
we
this.
never are.
No, we're not, and
Well,
that's
that's it.
part of it.
Restless,
No,
or to be in control, maybe, or?
I don't know.
And that's why, again, I go back to my version of how to summarize the story of the garden is that Eve, in the most powerful representation of every human being who has ever lived, says to God, you have no idea what it is like to live this way. Well, I don't know the future. I don't know how to secure my future. And all you say to me is, trust me. You don't know what that's like. You don't know what it is like to have to trust what you cannot see, what you cannot really hear. And you say, well, that's the basis of a good and prosperous life. And what Eve says is, I can't live that way. So she eats of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because she says, I have to have something on which I can base my faith. Faith cannot be confidence in things unseen. I have to know. I need to know. And I've often argued, I know it goes a little beyond the nuance of the narrative, but I think what Eve wanted to know was whether God was good or evil. Or was God actually more like Pharaoh, who loved dependency of people and loved to create environments where you have to come to me for everything?
Well, that's power. That's abuse. of
Yeah,
power.
it is.
Yeah. And that goes on. It's a human
Yeah,
frailty.
unfortunately.
It's like a drug. You know, you get a bit of a taste of it, and then even if you started out a nicer person, it can certainly change you. And that's the Iblis or the shaitan
Mhm,
whispering,
in the ear.
whispering, like, you know, you could have this if you just pretended you didn't know about. Those people have, you know, and they should help themselves.
Right.
You're not your brother's keeper.
And again, the difference I have is I don't need a figure of Shaitan to do that. I think life does that.
Yeah.
I think the created order whispers in our ears. I think it whispers words of, you're a fool if you think you can trust the future. You're a fool if you think that you're somehow comforted and that you're somehow guarded and protected. Because look, your neighbor just contracted, you know, a terrible virus and is dying. What is the difference between the two of you? And those are the words, but I don't need
Well, you
I
don't
think,
actually-
no, I understand. But life does that.
Yeah.
That is the serpent. That is what the serpent
It's not
does.
true. It says wealth itself can sometimes be
Right.
this thing that comes to you that's a test for you. What do you do with it? It's not in and of itself bad. It's what you do with it and how you act when you acquire it. Are you generous
Yeah, and I think, are
or
you
are you not?
Yeah, are you going to trust wealth? Is wealth going to be your God?
And it
If
sure
wealth is your God, you're screwed, whether you know it or not. Because wealth is temporary, wealth does not produce what it promises. All of that is there, but wealth is a part of the created order. It's here.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories about, in the Bible about people with vineyards, because they were an agrarian society. And in the Quran too, it's like, you know, you're fooling yourself. You've got the biggest vineyard, you've got the best this, that. Tomorrow, it could be gone.
It could be gone. You're going to build your future and your sense of confidence in the world in that. Then what are you going to do when you're out of money and food? And then the other, Jesus said, look, how does the world work? How does creation work? You take one seed of wheat, you plant it in the ground, it grows and produces 10 times. So 100 seeds are produced with that. And Jesus and the Hebrew narrative are saying, trust that. Trust that productivity, that multiplicity that is built into the created order. But the stories Jesus, of course, tells of a man who said, look at me. I planted, 5,000 seeds of wheat. Now I have 10 million. I'm going to build big barns, and I'm going to store it. Why? Because I know this year there wasn't a drought, but I can't trust. I cannot trust God. I cannot.
That was always my argument with Jack Laura before, and he said it's a really good reason not to like insurance companies, because
Right.
it's really not biblical to have insurance, and yet how do you survive without it? I don't know who's brave enough, and in some cases, the state
Says you
compels
have
you
to.
to.
Yeah.
Right.
Can't
You're,
drive
you're
without-
required.
Right.
So, and that's why,
How do we live our lives between?
and how do I know when I'm living my life in a way that is trusting God, really trusting God, so that I can say, I am a person who knows that faith is the essence of trust in things you cannot see, in things you cannot know. But immediately, life will get in your face and will say, oh, you trusted your 24-year-old son to be on a good road playing professional football, and in a family, you trusted God for that. That is a Christian family, and they are everybody's praying. But we all know, like, any minute can come in which life will reduce you to an element of nothingness. And that's the terms of life. It's life on life's terms. And the invitation of Jesus to me seems to be, you be careful what you put your confidence in, who you put your confidence in. Because, I go back to that image, the world is still filled with chaos.
Jesus said the hour is coming, you don't know when, you don't know where, but it's coming.
Yeah.
Be ready.
Well, yeah.
Be a
So,
Boy Scout. Be
right.
prepared.
So Jesus' idea was to say that in order to build faith. I think every time it comes up in human conversation, it's given to build fear. Be careful, be ready. The evangelist, when I was in church, who said, you're a young teenager, you could get up out of that pew. And I remember this sermon. You'll walk out to the street corner and be struck by a car and be dead. So have you given your life to Jesus Christ? And my response as a critically thinking human being at that time is, so are you saying if I give my life to Jesus Christ, I won't be hit by a truck? No. So in the end, what difference does it make? Because I cannot trust out there in the world. The world is a wild and woolly place where anything can happen. So then what does it mean to be a person of faith? And that's why I come back to can I even say this? I haven't thought this all the way out because I got myself here. That the sign of faith emerges in your own compassion, generosity, kindness, and the seeking of justice in the world. That is faith. Because if your son is laying in the hospital room and is dying, and you can still find room at your table to invite another person to come in and share, maybe your uncertain resources for the future, that's faith. That's faith. And it doesn't guarantee that person that you invite in is not going to be intending to do harm to you. It doesn't. But how do we live in faith? How do we encounter the chaos of the world? Confidence in life and confidence in God is multiplied as we exercise those gifts. We exercise them. And where do they come from? They come from God.
These very same stories can have the opposite effect, like you just said.
Yes.
If somebody goes out and says, it doesn't matter what I do,
Yep.
how generous I am with my neighbors, or, whatever, if I'm still gonna die, we're all gonna die, so why not live like there's no tomorrow, because there might not be. That's not what Jesus was saying.
No,
Jesus is
that's
saying,
right.
Right,
you still need to be a part of this world,
right.
and to find the goodness and love in this world, and not turn your back on that. That's faith that there will be a world even after you're gone.
Right.
And you should leave it in a better state than you found it. But there's also that temptation to hear those stories and say, then who the heck cares? I'm not going to change it. One person can't change the world. And that's why there's an emphasis on the community in Islam, because you are one person. But if you act with others in a community, you can affect change.
there is
We
a
know
change.
that you can. Even one person can. But
Yeah.
so yeah, that's faith. You act as if love is a driving force. Love and generosity and all the things that, you're compelled to do by faith, I think, is what is healing the world, not adding to the chaos. Is it moving towards a place where there will never be chaos? I don't think so.
I think that, again, the word blessing works for me. At least there'll be a blessing in the middle of the chaos.
Right. It's not going to be paradise.
No.
Yeah.
I think for us as humans, like you were saying about, like, we're gonna die anyway, but I can remember, like, the Lord's Prayer where it says, and deliver us from evil. And I always thought about, well, I had a cousin who died when I was like 11, and I always thought, yeah, that would be it. But I don't know that death is the evil. It's the malice of the world, like that, because
Yeah,
like
deliver
you
us
said,
from
Debbie,
evil.
Yeah, we're all, if you're born, you're gonna die.
Right.
It's just the way of life, and it's part of life. That's, it truly is part of this life that we live. And even like the death of our loved ones, as we go through all that grief, and like in so many ways, it makes us appreciate life even more, the loss of others. And I was thinking, if we could just get past that and realize we need to get rid of the malice and not fear death like we do, because we do.
Yeah.
Because it's like you said, the unknown, Pastor.
It's also, I fully support, again, my need to be systematic. I support everything you're saying. And then I do the thing that you say, but. I don't think we fear death just because we think it's evil. We fear death because it's painful. It is extremely painful, and the pain of it does not diminish in many, many ways. And so I'm never all that excited about a theology that tries to normalize death. I get it. It's part of life's terms, but in accepting life on life's terms, we can say death is inevitable. I always, at every funeral service, turn away from the casket and go, we all go down to the dust. But I think we make a mistake if we try to incorporate death into the ordered side of life. Death is a part of the chaos. Death was the consequence of not trusting in the story of the Garden of Eden. And I get it. My experience of death is I can have faith in God. I can, think I can try to put my faith into practice. But death is death. And it has a unique power that I understand why we're afraid of it. I do. I think we have to be careful what we do in our fear of it. And I think there, again, like I was saying, that there are traditions that say learn to walk in the darkness. I think there is health and well-being that teaches us to accept the reality of the death and the loss that we have received and learn how now to live differently in light of the fact that death is real. It's real. And it's the door slamming, it's definitive. And I think, again, you go back to the story of the garden, people will say, of course the death of human beings is like the death of the deer and the trees. Everything has its season. I understand that. But remember, in the biblical story, human beings were different. They were different than the cycles of the earth and the moon and the stars. They're different. And why are they different? Because we are uniquely created for relationship with God and with each other. And I think that's part of why death is so, I don't know, it's like I say in my funeral services, if you've come to this funeral and you know this person has died and you think that you're going to get over this, you don't understand how we exist in each other's lives. And I'm not trying to talk about despair. I'm just saying there's good reason to not want, especially you work with parents who lose children. And you go, okay, I'll stand with you, but 8 years from now, if you need to cry, you come here because there's a shoulder here to cry on that will understand that you are feeling the same thing you felt the day that child died.
Yeah, you never get over it. It's
No.
always there. It's just, it may not be as raw as it is. And life and other relationships soften it along the way, but it's always there.
And one of the things we talked about last night, and I was dredging up again from my Christian upbringing, this idea of trying to earn salvation, right? You do good works in order to earn salvation. And I was reminded that I think in the best way of sorting it out, you're not earning salvation by being kind and being compassionate. You're exercising the gifts that God gives you as a child of God. So yeah, your child was run over by a car or died from a disease that, has altered your life forever. And then, one of the great heroes of my life is a woman I met early in my ministry whose child, 6 years, suffered with a terrible degenerative disease. The child died. The woman wept and wept and wept. During her weeping, which continues today, she is the national chairperson of an organization that seeks out people whose children get this rare disease. She flies to where they are. She sits with them in comfort. She promises nothing to them, but she is exercising the gifts that God gives her in the middle of the chaos of life. And that's how I think about, giving to charity or giving, inviting people into your home. You're not trying to earn anything. You're saying, look at me. God has opened my eyes to realize there's a room at my table for somebody else, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because God has given me the grace to be able to do it. But it's got nothing to do with either establishing or fixing or earning a relationship with God. It's not there. There was a big debate online. A Presbyterian minister in the PCUSA conversation chat room was appalled that a new candidate in ministry had done the confession of assurance. You do the confession of sin, and then there's the assurance of pardon. And the pronouns that this young person used was, we say, I say it together, in Christ we are forgiven. But the whole congregation says it. Well, in this student stood up, and after the people prayed the prayer of confession, said, I proclaim to you that you are forgiven. Oh my gosh, it just released this huge firestorm of both defense of it, and the reason the person was so upset, is because the leader of that, and the announcer of that, was not ordained. And I go, okay, wait a minute. That is like, okay, we are not bishops, we're not priests. It doesn't matter ordained or not ordained. And I do believe, I followed the conversation, I believe that any person can go up to any person with confidence and proclaim to them that if they are honest and they're willing to name the brokenness of their life, you are forgiven. I'm not forgiving you. Yeah, I know. I'm not the one forgiving you.
Saying what you want to teach.
Yeah, so this person wants that student to be removed from the candidacy for pastor because they must think they're a priest. I'm like, I thought we were the priesthood of all believers.
Exactly. I thought that's what the Reformation was about. It's not just the priest
Yes.
that has to hear your confession.
Yeah, I said, we don't need no stinking priest.
Wow.
Let's read a chapter. What do you say? Let's see what Isaiah can stir up for us beyond what we've stirred up for Isaiah.
Lots of trouble
I know.
for our mind.
I know.
Would you like me to read?
Okay, or we're at 10, right?
10, yeah.
All right,
How
go for it.
terrible it will be for the lawmakers who write evil laws. They write laws that make life hard for people. They are not fair to the poor. They rob my people of their rights. They allow people to steal from widows and to take from orphans what they should get. Lawmakers, how will you explain the things you have done? What will you do when your destruction comes from far away? Where will you run for help? Where will you hide your money and your riches then? You will have to bow down among the captives. You will fall down among the dead bodies. But the Lord is still angry. His hand is still raised to strike down the people. God says, how terrible it will be for the king of Assyria. I use him like a stick. In anger I use Assyria like a club. I sent it to fight against a nation that is separated from God. I am angry with those people. So I command Assyria to fight against them. Assyria will take their wealth from them. Judah will become like dirt for them to walk on in the streets. But Assyria's king doesn't understand that I am using him. He doesn't know he is a tool for me. He only wants to destroy other people. He plans to destroy many nations. The king of Assyria says to himself, all my commanders are like kings. The city of Calno is like the city of Carchemish. Carchemish. And the city of Hamath is like the city of Arpad. The city of Samaria is like the city of Damascus. I defeated those kingdoms that worship idols, and those idols were more than the idols of Jerusalem and Samaria. I defeated Samaria and her idols. I will also defeat Jerusalem and her idols. The Lord will finish doing what he planned to Mount Zion and Jerusalem. Then he will punish Assyria. The king of Assyria is very proud. His pride made him to do these bad things, so God will punish him. The king of Assyria says this, by my own power I have done these things. By my wisdom I have defeated many nations. I have taken their wealth, and like a mighty one I have taken their people. I have taken the riches of all these people, like one who reaches into a bird's nest. I have taken these nations like a person taking eggs. No one raised a hand against me. No one opened his mouth to stop me. An axe is not better than the person who swings it. A saw is not better than the person who uses it. A stick cannot control the person who picks it up. A club cannot pick up the person. So the Master, the Lord of heaven's armies, will send a terrible disease against Assyria's soldiers. The strength of Assyria will be burned up. It will be like a fire burning until everything is gone. God, the light of Israel, will be like a fire. The Holy One will be like a flame. He will be like a fire that suddenly burns the weeds and thorns. The fire burns away great trees and rich farmlands. It will destroy everything. Things will be like a sick man who wastes away. Only a few trees will be left standing. There will be so few, even a child will be able to count them. At that time, some people will be left alive in Israel from the family of Jacob. They will not continue to depend on the person who defeated them. They will learn truly to depend on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. The people who are left alive in Jacob's family will again follow the powerful God. Israel, your people are very many. They are like the grains of sand by the sea, but only a few of them will be left alive to return to the Lord. God has announced that he will destroy the land completely and fairly. The Master, the Lord of heaven's armies, will certainly destroy the land. He will destroy it as he has announced. This is what the Master, the Lord of heaven's armies, says. My people living in Jerusalem, don't be afraid of the Assyrians. They beat you with a rod. They raise a stick to hurt you as Egypt did. But after a short time my anger will stop. Then I will turn my anger to destroying them. Then the Lord of heaven's armies will beat the Assyrians with a whip. He will defeat them as he defeated Midian or the rock of Oreb. He will raise his stick over the waters as he did in Egypt. Then the troubles that Assyria puts on you will be removed. The load they make you carry will be taken away. The army of Assyria will enter near Aiath. They will walk through Migron. They will store their food in Michmash. Army will go over the pass. They will sleep at Geba. The people of Ramah will be afraid. The people at Gibeah of Saul will run away, cry out, Bath Galim, Lasha, listen, poor Anathoth. The people of Medmenah are running away. The people of Gebim are hiding. This day the army will stop at Nob, and the army will shake their fists at Mount Zion, at the hill of Jerusalem. Watch, the Master, the Lord of heaven's armies, will chop them down with a great tree. He will do this with his great power. Those who are great will be cut down. Those who are important will fall to the ground. The Lord will cut them down as a forest is cut down with an axe, and the great trees of Lebanon will fall by the power of the mighty one.
This is before the diaspora,
Right,
right? Okay.
right. This is still, the Assyrians were first, but I mean, there's, yeah, the rise of the Assyrians on the border is imminent. The attack of the Assyrians is coming. And Isaiah is trying to write into the future to say, you know, it's going to be bad. But I don't know. I know it gets into the whole things about, is this a punishing God? And I have no problem with the idea that if the Hebrew people are, as is described in the early part of this narrative, where the halls of justice are perverted, where the poor are starving to the deafness of the community, and justice is ignored, I say, let it rain. Let the end come.
Because what are you preserving?
Yeah, and I think this is at least a place, you know, I've been talking about how in Nehemiah and Ezra, they talk about obeying the law of God. But it's never named. What is the law? What is that law that you want obeyed? Nehemiah says it's don't let your daughters marry, you know, aliens. Like, but what is the law of God? Are you reading it? Isaiah says, here's the law of God. Here is what needs to be obeyed. And in some ways, I find more similarity between Isaiah and Jesus than I do between Jesus and King David. Because Jesus brings the searing critique of Isaiah to bear, not really so much on the Romans, but he brings it to bear on the Jewish community in which he finds himself. The Sabbath, you're keeping the Sabbath, but you're only keeping it to, give yourself the idea that we're really righteous people. Meanwhile,
You're showing off for somebody else. Like,
yeah,
look how
right, yeah, and meanwhile, people are dying because you won't feed them on the Sabbath, and you know your cow can fall in a well, and all the workers will come and pull the cow out of the well to save its life, but you won't lift a finger to help a human being suffering because I healed this man on the Sabbath. That to me is the Isaiah critique. And I guess, I don't.
God doesn't take time off?
No, God doesn't take time off, but also watch out because you cannot mock the law of God. And I think what Isaiah is saying is, it's coming. The Assyrians are going to come, and you have cried out and said, well, we can't be harmed because we're the people of God. And Isaiah is saying, you are fools because you, again, I go back, look at the list. Widows are your spoil, and you make orphans your prey. This is in verse 2. That you rob the poor. You rob the poor of my people of their right, and you turn aside the needy from justice, and you write oppressive laws. You write laws that actually oppress the people. And you claim then that you were my people. That's impossible. Because whatever the law of God is, the law, the Apostle Paul later on says the law was given, Jesus even says the law is established for the benefit of the people. So the Sabbath was given for the benefit of the people so that you could get a day off from an oppressive boss.
As Jesus said, if somebody is dying in front of you, you don't turn your back.
No, because in the spirit of Sabbath, which is caring for people, you would do everything you can to care for people. Again, I've said this before. Growing up in a Presbyterian farm, my grandparents were Presbyterian and regularly attenders, but they are not like, as a child, my dad was a stickler for you do nothing on Sunday. You're not allowed to listen to the radio. You have to go to church. You can get dressed and you can go to church, but you don't do anything. But when I got to the farm and I live on the farm, we got up Sunday mornings like every other morning.
And the cows still need
The cows had to be milked, and we worked. And then the one thing that we did as a little head nod to the Sabbath was, our normal thing was arrive at the barn at 5, get the milking going, milk the cows. You'd be done around 8:30, and then from 8:30 to about 9:15, you had to clean up. You had to, because the cows are messy, and you had to make sure all the cows were fed, and the calves and everything else had to be fed. Well, on Sunday, that second part was let go. The cows and calves could wait till after church to be fed. And so we would go home and we would shower. It didn't do any good. We still smelled like cow manure, I swear. It was, you could only go to church there because nobody
there.
smelled the cow manure when you got to church. But we would go to church, and after church, my grandmother would be making the big meal of the day, but we would go back to the barn. And we would go back, and then we would clean up, and then we would feed the very hungry cows. And as a child, I was told that was how the Sabbath had to be adjusted for what had to be done.
Sabbath is for the people.
It is for the people. And so the law of God, the law, when it's done well, even the laws of society are supposed to be laws that seek the well-being of people. But what happens when the laws actually seek to benefit a certain group of people and create injustice and oppression for people? Then God is not behind those laws. And if you persist, if you do like these people have done,
You have to use a bit of discernment.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just, I don't know.
in Jesus' time, there was a law at the time that if you were a child of a mother and father who had accumulated a lot of wealth, and then your father died, the wealth and its belongingness went to your mother. I mean, it did. You had to have your son that sort of supervised it like a trustee, but it went to your mother. But when that happened, the son could basically dedicate all the father's wealth. This is sort of like tax evasion, only it's church evasion. There was a word called korban, and you would commit all of your father's estate and declare it korban, which made it unavailable to your mother and made it fully available to the son as an heir. And what Jesus screams about, he calls these people whitewashed sepulchres because they're tombs. What's behind it is he is learning about this trick. And the result of this trick is that their mothers are living on the street, destitute and poor, while they have robbed everything from the care of their mother, and they have done it in the name of God.
Downton Abbey that story of how your possessions get passed along, entailment, I think it's
Yeah,
called. In Great Britain, you know, these big estates, they have to be kept together, so they go to the son. In certain instances, there's nothing for the wife
no.
Right.
at all.
She's passed straight up.
I don't
They go
know
out
that
to-
it was a part of faith, but it was the law, and probably at some point in time, it was based on some kind of, something they found in biblical writing.
Sure,
or
because they
something,
actually
most
go,
law
they
was.
actually go to they show us that second cousin, whatever his name was,
Right,
Matthew,
'cause
right?
that's the next male
Yes,
heir.
and he has all these, well,
And-
3 daughters, then, I like that
former
show,
wife
too.
Yeah,
and
you too.
Girls are out in the cold, yeah.
yeah.
So,
Well,
that sounds like something written by men. for
Yeah,
men.
I think the trick of Korban was,
All
I think
right.
I'm clear about it now, so the son would inherit everything. But he would be expected to care for and take care of his mother, right?
Exactly, that's your
But
responsibility.
the son would declare all that he had inherited as Korban. I can't do anything about it because it's not really my money. I'm living on it, but I can't give it to my mother because it belongs to the synagogue. But I'm just the trustee for
The
it.
trustee,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take care of it.
And so
Wow.
Jesus is seeing, he's walking around and trying to figure out the origin of all these women and children who are living on the street, and people wonder, why did Jesus get so angry? It's the same anger as Isaiah has. You have written laws in the name of God that actually deprive people of a basic right to life, if you will.
Well, weren't widows also supposed to, like if your husband had a brother?
Yeah.
That you were supposed to?
be married the
Yes.
brother, and, they were polygamous anyway, so, there
Yeah.
could be more than one wife. You were supposed to take care of that person. You weren't supposed to, now if there was no male in family to go to,
She,
And even beyond that, you hear mentions in the New Testament of the temple treasury. The temple treasury, the temple collected money. Some of it was supposed to be for the care and keeping of the priesthood. But beyond that, the money that the temple collected was like social welfare. It was to be distributed to the children and the orphans to show that God is generous. And Jesus, when he sees that widow who has children put the 2 pennies into the box of the temple treasury, he draws the disciples' attention to it and says, look at her. Her faith is strong because she thinks that her future is with God, so she's thrown in the last 2 pennies she has. But Jesus is alarmed because he knows none of that will ever come back to benefit her. None of it. That's the last she'll ever see of her last 2 pennies to feed her life and her children. So Isaiah could have popped out of the closet at this point and started, reading his
right, all of
saying, which is, you want to be delivered from Rome? You want to be out from under the hand of your oppressor?
stop oppressing.
Stop oppressing the little people who are part of your way of life. Now, when that happens, I love the Bible.
There you go.
I really love the Bible. I get, it's the juice for me. The part where God's punishment seems to be indiscriminate because you didn't, I don't know, the rules about idols and all the rest of that. I'm not convinced that any of that was legitimate. I think that's human beings. That their power is getting
We
watered
love
down.
rules like that, right?
Well, yeah, let's just make
Right.
sure none of our daughters marry people that,
That are
that are
aliens.
aliens. That's what God cares about, right?
You go back, what book was it, Leviticus? That has
Oh, all the laws.
laws, and some of them are so ridiculous. They must have had some reason for them at some point in time.
Right.
But
They're
the one
bizarre.
that I think is the most bizarre is do not mix a fabric with
Right.
another fabric.
Yeah.
And today, everything is,
Blended,
Blends.
blended
They're all
fabrics,
blends.
that's right.
we're all going to go to hell.
That's the genius of clothing today, is the
Yeah.
blending of fabrics.
So when these politicians stand up and say, you must have biblical marriage, what are they referring to? Solomon? David? Whose biblical marriage are they? And they do it all the time whenever they want to argue against, gay
Yeah.
marriage. We must have biblical marriage. Well, point it out to me which one you want to model.
There's not one. There is not one model of a functioning, healthy marriage in the entire Bible.
I can't remember.
Abraham and Sarah? Nope. Forget it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's not one. There is not one. So be careful.
So, and if you're going to adhere to this, adhere to all of it.
Yeah.
Take away all those poly blends.
Yeah, how would that work? I mean, to go through all that law.
I like to, people say, oh, you know, Christianity is built on the family and marriage. That's the rock of, and then you get to the Apostle Paul who says, listen, get married only if you're burning with such sexual desire that you're gonna like rape somebody.
Otherwise, it's not good
Yeah,
for you.
otherwise, stay away from marriage. Now there's the rock on which the church will be built.
Doesn't Jesus himself say your family is your enemy?
Well, yeah, Jesus says, you know, look, you got to keep your family over there so that you can be true and following in faith. These kinds of things make
Yeah,
me
me
go
too.
crazy in my head because, you know, and then I'm told, don't think about it.
Yeah.
Just,
Pay no
Yeah,
attention to the
yeah,
man
but
behind
that's
the
Just-
curtain.
hard.
yeah, just do,
That's hard.
just go ahead in the tradition. Follow tradition. It's tradition. Because, you know, the best arguments on the marriage subject, which are interesting, are, but that's not the way we've ever done it.
That's right.
Oh, yes. Oh, no way.
I like, oh, really? So we're going to build our Christian beliefs on the tradition of marriage. No. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Pastor Lou.
I love Isaiah, at least this part of it.
Yeah, it is more inspiring.
Yeah, it
Than
feels
some of the
more,
others.
yes. I know, and people say, well, how would you make the decision between what God is like and what humans are like? And I always say, really, read it, you'll see it.
Yeah,
You'll have no trouble sorting out the difference between what is
yeah.
the concerns and the words of human beings.
And be aware when somebody
Right.
says they're speaking for God. I go,
Yeah.
The act of telling the truth is always a beautiful thing, no matter how ugly that truth may
That's
be.
right. That's
And
right.
I think about that and I think, boy, to put it out there can only make it better. You know, to
Maybe
claim.
not at first.
No, but to claim, but no.
You'll make some
But
enemies.
to claim the truth is really, it is. It's a courageous thing to do.
It is. In the 12-step program, they say, you say the truth unless telling the truth is going to be more
Hurt
harmful.
someone else, yes.
So
To
you do
hurt
have to be
someone
aware.
else. Even your own truth, they
Yes.
say, yeah.
Oh, well, and then,
Bless you.
God bless. Now back to the world of chaos.
Yeah, let the chaos begin.
Yeah.